It's the last day of campaigning in the EU referendum, with both sides urging their supporters to turn out and vote. Leave and Remain campaign leaders are crisscrossing the country, reinforcing their message in the final hours.
Go out and vote Remain for a bigger, better Britain inside a reformed European Union.
The ideal position for us is to take back control tomorrow of huge amounts of money so we can spend it on our priorities.
I'm in Westminster, where we'll be assessing the impact of both campaigns with our political correspondents.
And also on the programme this lunchtime. After the decision to bring no charges, Sir Cliff Richard calls for a change in the law to protect suspects' anonymity.
The name should never be out there unless you have been charged. And here I am, 22 months and a week later, and no charge.
Vigils are to be held around the world for the murdered MP Jo Cox on what would have been her 42nd birthday. And already stuck in the mud at Glastonbury, wet weather causes huge delays getting to the festival before it even opens.
In the south, what's the best prognosis for the NHS when we vote on Europe tomorrow? We hear from both sides. And every student's nightmare. Their exam paper didn't cover any of the topics they revised. Thousands demand a resit.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Leave and Remain teams are in full swing on the last full day of campaigning before voting tomorrow in the EU referendum. Leaders of both campaigns have been travelling around the country trying to get their message across and persuade undecided voters. Let's cross to Westminster for the latest and join Simon McCoy. Simon.
Jane, the campaigning from both sides is going down to the wire, with politicians travelling up and down the country today. Leave supporter Boris Johnson began a tour of England, declaring that it was time to speak up for democracy and to break away from a failing and dysfunctional EU system. David Cameron has sought to reassure voters that Britain would be stronger and safer, and not, as some have suggested, shackled to a corpse if it stayed inside the European Union. Alex Forsyth reports.
120% out.
Some are sure, but many are still undecided. And it's those voters who matter now.
Take back control.
Yeah, we're there. We're there. Yeah.
This, the final push, the last chance to meet, speak, convince, persuade. Leave campaigners were at a fish market this morning, the first stop in a busy day. They're focused on their main arguments around immigration and sovereignty.
We've been getting a lot across our key messages, which is take back control of huge sums of money, about £10 billion worth, take back control of our immigration policy in a fair and balanced way so that you can actually do something to make sure you get the right people coming to this country, and much more importantly, in a way for me, just take back control of our democracy.
The Remain camp too is sticking to their central theme, the risk to the economy of leaving the EU.
We've got the Green Party, we've got the Liberal Democrat Party, we've got the Labour Party, we've got a Conservative government and Prime Minister, we've got the trade unions, we've got business, large and small, all saying we are stronger, we're safer, we're better off if we stay.
And the man who knows just how tough battles over Europe can be came out fighting too.
If we leave, I have a range of concerns. Many of them are about families and their quality of life and their living standards. But we would also be diminished as a country. I don't wish to see a broken Britain with less influence, less importance in the world.
The stakes are high, and just what this means to both sides is now clear.
Vote with your heart, vote with your soul, vote with pride in this country and its people. And together, we can make tomorrow our Independence Day, a big day in our national history.
Today, the campaigns are away from Westminster. They're out on the stump, rattling letterboxes, rallying crowds, making every minute count. And today, on the last full day before the polls open, the contested facts, the details of this debate still matter. But the pictures to people's emotions to make the right decision for the country. Because both sides know the outcome of this vote matters here and far beyond. So after months of speeches, debates and visits, it's the last lap. Today's about hammering home key messages, motivating voters to turn out and then awaiting the country's decision. Alex Forsyth, BBC News.
They're racking up the miles, both sides spending the last day of campaigning travelling across the country. Well, in a moment we're going to be speaking to Ben Wright. He's with the Leave campaign. But first, Tom Bateman is with the Remain camp in Abingdon in Oxfordshire with the Prime Minister in what, a field of cows?
Well, that's right. You join us in a field in Oxfordshire. We're on a dairy farm. The Prime Minister at the moment with Harriet Harman speaking to the farmer here. This is a place that exports milk right across Europe. I was chatting to the farmer and he was talking about his concerns about a vote to leave the European Union. And that is on a frenetic last day of campaigning for the Stronger In campaign, the message that they want to get across. They want to hammer it to those wavering voters, those people who haven't yet made up their minds, that they see a risk in leaving the European Union, a risk to the economy, a risk to jobs and prosperity. You're going to hear that message over and over again as they crisscross the west of England today. And we had Sir John Major, David Cameron's predecessor, giving a bit of a sledgehammer tone to that message earlier, saying that the Vote Leave side were like the gravediggers of Britain's prosperity. But the Leave side thinks, and it knows, that the vulnerability for this campaign is on the issue of immigration. And I think that's why we've heard the Prime Minister say today that in his view there could be further reforms of the freedom of movement rules, and that he says if there is a vote to remain in, that reform, in his view, will continue.
Well, let's go to Ben Wright. He's with the Leave campaign in Ashby de la Zouch in Leicestershire, and hours left to hammer those key slogans, aren't there, Ben?
Yes, that's right, Simon. Boris Johnson is rattling through England. He began at Billingsgate Market in London, then a stop in Essex, then here, a Midlands market town. He'll be in Yorkshire later on. Not really talking, I don't think, about immigration today so much, more like liberation. He's talking about democracy, sovereignty. When he was walking down the high street here an hour or two ago, a couple of people shouted Independence Day behind him as he walked along, and he grinned. That's, of course, the phrase he used at the end of the debate yesterday, and I think it's cut through quite effectively. This is the sort of town, I think, that leans quite heavily towards Leave. He had a lot of support here, but he was also harangued by a couple of people, mainly younger people, who sort of said, look, if this all goes wrong, if the economy tanks, if younger people lose out in the future, then you, Mr. Johnson, will be blamed, is what one person said. But on the whole, this was a supportive crowd, and the choreography of this is interesting too. Boris Johnson, he does have star power. People have been coming up to me all morning and asking if Boris Johnson's still here, and he likes plunging into a town centre like this unannounced. It's not very controlled, and seeing what happens. And I think certainly people I've been speaking to here quite like that approach to his campaign.
Ben Wright in Ashby de la Zouch, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's here with me now. And it's probably a good time to just assess both campaigns with hours left.
Well, I think what is extraordinary is here we are on the eve of a truly historic moment in our national life, and I defy anyone to confidently predict what on earth is going to happen. And that seems to me to be the real story of this campaign, because when it began, Mr. Cameron had the government, he had business opinion, he had international leaders, he had the economic arguments all lined up behind him, and it seemed as if the overwhelming balance of opinion, argument and resources were on his side. But during the course of the campaign, the Brexit side have slowly clawed their way back and are now right on his shoulder. Now, in part, that is because of immigration, but it is also because they made this referendum almost a peasants' revolt, a popular uprising against the powerful, the elites, the banks, the big business. And that was playing to that sense of grievance, which perhaps goes all the way back to the banking crash. It may go back further to a disenchantment with politics. And the other thing they had was Boris Johnson. And I don't think one should underestimate the way he has galvanised the Leave side. He has given them leadership, he has given them presence, profile and panache. Which means here we are with two big beasts, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, toe-to-toe, two big arguments, the economy and immigration, two campaigns which have pleaded, cajoled, sought to frighten us to back them. And on the cusp of this historic moment, we simply do not know which of the two very different paths the British people are going to take.
Norman, thank you very much. Norman Smith, our assistant political editor, campaigning Just hours left now before voters go to the polls tomorrow. That's the scene in Westminster. Back to you, Jane.
Simon, thank you. Now, the rest of the day's news, and Sir Cliff Richard is calling for a change to the law so that people accused of sexual offences have their identity protected until they're charged. Last week, prosecutors announced that Sir Cliff will face no charges in relation to historical allegations of sexual abuse. The singer also said he may sue South Yorkshire Police and the BBC, which broadcast footage of a raid on his house at the start of the investigation 2 years ago. Daniel Bircher reports.
In August 2014, Sir Cliff Richard's home in Berkshire was raided by detectives. South Yorkshire Police was investigating historical allegations of sexual abuse. The raid was filmed and broadcast by the BBC. Last week, almost 2 years on, Sir Cliff was told that he would face no charges. The Crown Prosecution Service said there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. Sir Cliff has said he may sue South Yorkshire Police and the BBC. Today, in an ITV interview, he said he was justified in considering legal action.
There must have been illegal collusion. I've never known. I don't think investigations take place with lighting and cameras and, you know, special angles for the helicopter. It just seemed ridiculous. So I feel I have every right to sue because of nothing else, definitely for the gross invasion of my privacy.
Sir Cliff said he still felt tarnished by the allegations, and he called for a change in the law so that people accused of sexual offences have their identity protected unless they're charged.
The name should never be out there unless you have been charged. And here I am, 22 months and a week later, and no charge. I don't like the idea of being collateral damage. And that's what I've been for 22 months.
The BBC said it was very sorry that Sir Cliff Richard had suffered distress, but it said the corporation reported Sir Cliff's full denial of the allegations at every stage and that it stood by the decision to report the investigation and the search of his property. South Yorkshire Police has said it apologised wholeheartedly for the additional anxiety caused by its initial handling of the media interest in the case. It said it appreciated that waiting for a conclusion would undoubtedly have caused additional distress to all those involved, but that it was in the interests of justice to investigate such matters thoroughly. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
Northern Ireland has joined England and Wales in the last 16 of the European Championships. Although they lost 1-0 to Germany last night, they go through as one of the best third-place teams and will meet Wales or the hosts France for a place in the last 8. Sally Nugent is in Paris. Hello, Sally.
Thanks, Jane. Yes, last night's results have given us the best possible scenario. All home nations are through to the next round here in France. Facing the world champions Germany, a heavy defeat could have sent Northern Ireland home, but their goalkeeper put in the performance of a lifetime to keep them in the tournament. It was a 1-0 defeat, but today it feels much more like a win, as Katie Gornall reports.
And so the bandwagon rolls on. Northern Ireland's fans will be talking about this for years to come, although not everyone will remember they were here. A 1-0 loss to Germany, the best defeat they could have hoped for.
You know, for us to come out of that group was an immense achievement. Great group of players. I think they deserve the opportunity to go to the round of 16. I fear who may play in that, but listen, that's what this experience is all about. You know, we're taking lads here who play their club football in the Football League and are coming up here playing against some of the best players in the world.
They owe a great deal to their goalkeeper, Michael McGovern, who performed heroics to turn back the German tide. It proved crucial as later results meant they went through on goal difference, and this was the moment the players found out the Turkeys' win had put them into the last 16. Today, one former Northern Ireland international told me their achievement will have a lasting impact.
Back home, it's going to be massive. I mean, hopefully it'll inspire a whole new generation of players as well as supporters. And, you know, the money that the FA get probably, you know, pumped into the grassroots, and it can only be good for Northern Ireland and for the football.
So what next for Northern Ireland? Well, they could be back here at the Parc des Princes on Saturday to face Wales, and Michael O'Neill has said that that would be his preference. But the more likely option is that they'll go back to Lyon to play the hosts France on Sunday for a place in the quarter-finals. We'll know for certain after tonight's group matches.
We're not going home.
Northern Ireland is a small country that dreams big, and no one is ready to go home just yet. Katie Gornall, BBC News, Paris.
So, Northern Ireland joined England and Wales through to the last 16. Now all eyes will be on tonight's matches, because once we get those results, we'll know who plays who in the knockout stage. The Republic of Ireland face Italy in Lille. Italy have already qualified, so they might rest several key players. We'll also know each nation's potential path into the quarter-finals. The permutations are complex and tricky, but there is a possibility that Wales would face Northern Ireland in the last 16. That would mean we would be guaranteed at least one home nation in the last 8. Well, a bit like that other big European question, things are going to get clearer soon. Jane.
Sally, thank you. Sally Nugent. Rory McIlroy has pulled out of competing at this summer's Olympic Games in Rio because of concerns about the Zika virus. McIlroy, who was due to represent Ireland, said that although the risk of infection is considered low, it wasn't a risk he was prepared to take. The world number 4 is one of a number of high-profile golfers to withdraw from the Olympic Games. The time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. It is the last day of campaigning in the EU referendum, with both sides urging their supporters to turn out and vote. And coming up, could rain stop play at Glastonbury?
And in South today, every student's nightmare. Finding your exam doesn't cover any of the topics you expected. Thousands demand a resit. And the football world pays tribute to Reading Academy boss Eamon Dolan, who's died after a battle with cancer.
Memorials are being held around the world today to mark what would have been the 42nd birthday of the Labour MP Jo Cox. The former aid worker, who had 2 small children, was shot dead outside her constituency office in West Yorkshire on Thursday. Friends in Brussels, Nairobi and New York are holding events to remember her, as Jane McCubbin reports.
Freddie is one of the countless people Jo Cox had supported. His family had asked their MP to raise the issue of children who have to wait years for an autism diagnosis.
Autism diagnosis times are taking far too long. Our own children had been waiting 2.5 years.
Typical Yorkshire girl. She said, I'm going to do this. She went and did it.
We now know the value and importance of early and fast diagnosis, and yet our system continues to fail so many children and adults.
Last Thursday, on the day Jo was killed, Freddie finally received his diagnosis.
We were going to call Jo and thank her for all her help and assistance, but she was holding the surgery that morning, so we were going to leave it till the afternoon, make a call and thank her for her help with it, and obviously we didn't get to do that.
In Batley, the empty square will later be filled with thousands of people who also want to thank Jo. She would have been 42 today. A remarkable life which will be marked with memorial events around the world. Paul Taylor will help host the event here. His charity one of the 3 which will share in the 1 million raised in Jo's name.
It's going to be really powerful.
Yeah, it's really astonishing. It's great that we're going to have Batley, we're going to have London, and then we're going to have all these places internationally, and we're all going to link up in a real show of solidarity. And I think it's just going to be a real testament to how Jo was valued and loved.
Eloise, you've got big things planned in Brussels.
Yeah, that's right. We've got hundreds of people coming, and it's a chance really to celebrate her birthday, celebrate all the causes and the spirit of Jo.
I think we just wanted to come together and just celebrate her life and just remark on the incredible things that she brought to the world. I mean, here in Africa, in Darfur and Congo, she did some truly extraordinary things.
She's got many friends in New York, so we're going to get them all together to highlight these things she believes so strongly in, that we're need to come together, that we need to stand up against this hatred and extremism, and we've got more in common than divides us.
Outside the cafe just below Jo's constituency office, they're constantly stopping work to put flowers in water, a small gesture of respect to the lady that worked upstairs. Thousands more will offer their own respects at 4 o'clock.
And let's go to our correspondent Charlotte Leeming, who is in Batley, and explain what will be happening there later, Charlotte.
Yes, good afternoon, thank you. Yes, thousands of people are expected here in Batley later on this afternoon to mark what would have been Jo Cox's 42nd birthday. You can see a lot of preparation behind me, in fact, particularly the installation of the big screen. Now, that is there because they want to link up with communities right across the world here in Jo's hometown of Batley, with communities in Nairobi, Washington, New York, Oslo, Paris and London. They will be seeing speeches and activities that are taking place right across the globe. Now, organisers of this event, including Jo's husband, Brendan, they have said that they have done this under the banner, the hashtag More in Common, which of course comes from Jo's maiden speech to Parliament back in 2015. They have said that they have organised this so that as many thousands of people can get involved right across the globe to remember what she stood for her warmth, her love, her energy, her flair and her Yorkshire heritage. If you can't make it to one of these events that starts at 4 o'clock, you can get involved online using that hashtag More in Common on Facebook and on Twitter. They want to continue what she stood for and thousands to remember her legacy.
Charlotte Leeming in Batley, thank you. Pollution from many popular diesel cars is much worse when the temperature outside is lower than 18 degrees, according to new research. The industry body, the SMMT, says regulations allow for an increase in emissions at certain temperatures to prevent engines getting damaged. But some people suspect companies are using the exemption when they don't need to in order to achieve more miles per gallon. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott explains.
And temperatures not dropping too low. Most places in...
As you may have noticed, it's below 18 degrees for most of the year in Britain. Now it seems that temperature could be key when it comes to the growing problem of pollution in our towns and cities. This new research, seen by the BBC, found that levels of poisonous gases from many diesel cars were going up significantly when it was slightly colder outside. It suggests that millions of vehicles could be driving around for the vast majority of the year, with their emissions controls partly turned off. What's more, it's perfectly legal. Testing company Emissions Analytics says it looked at 213 different models across 31 different manufacturers. On average, above 18 degrees, levels of poisonous NOx gases were already 3.6 times over the European limit. But below that temperature, the pollution increased to 4.6 times over the limit.
The scandal with Volkswagen sort of ripped the lid off this whole area, and now people have started investigating in more detail, lots of people testing, us and others, and now beginning to unearth all sorts of other issues and other loopholes in the regulations that perhaps have been exploited. So I think there'll be more to come.
Car makers are allowed to wind down their pollution controls if it's to protect the engine. But there's a suggestion that some may be taking advantage of the rule because shutting off the emissions unit can improve the fuel economy. Can you guarantee they do need to do this for engineering reasons and, frankly, not to just give themselves a better miles per gallon?
No, absolutely. It is about ensuring that the engine maintains in an optimum condition. That means that you can expect that the car will start and it'll operate smoothly, and in the longer term there's no damage to the engine.
This data covers cars that had to pass the slightly older Euro 5 emissions test. There are 5.1 million of them on Britain's roads. There are now calls for car companies to come clean about exactly how their pollution systems work. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Now, if you have tickets for Glastonbury and are planning to drive there, you're being asked to delay setting off on your journey. Some festival goers have been spending many hours in traffic because of wet weather. More than 180,000 people are expected to arrive at the site in the next few days to see acts including Adele and Coldplay. Our correspondent Will Ross has the latest.
3, 2, 1.
Opening up what some call the best party on the planet. This lot are committed to the Glastonbury cause. They've been queuing all night and they're very early. The music doesn't start for another 2 days. Around 150,000 people are expected here. The tickets, which cost over £200 each, sold out in minutes. You need plenty of patience to get there. as these friends from Weymouth found out.
So we've been here about an hour and a half, 2 hours. We've probably gone 300 metres in that time. Quick report from the old VW Golf.
If there's two things that us Brits can do particularly well, it's queues and rain. We're doing both pretty well right now.
The festival organisers say a combination of bad weather and so many early birds has led to a lot of congestion at the site. Even though they say the bottleneck's improving, the advice to those who haven't yet set off is stay away for now. There will be music and mud, but it wouldn't be Glastonbury without the squelching wellies. Don't forget them.
I actually don't own wellies, and I didn't buy some, but I was hoping to get them here. I didn't realise I need them on the way in.
For some, the journey on foot sounded more like military training.
Uphill through the mud, all the way. A bit of a hard slog. It looks like we've made it, so it's all forgotten now.
With some more rain on the way, it might be another year like this. But don't they say mud's good for the skin? Will Ross, BBC News.
Well, we do have a weather forecast coming up in the next few minutes, but before that, a little more on our main story this lunchtime, because as we've been saying, there's just one day left until the UK decides whether to leave or remain in the European Union. 1 day of a campaign that has lasted, officially anyway, for 2 months. Christian Fraser looks back now at how the referendum campaign has played out.
So, just hours of the campaign left to run. Have you decided which box you're going to put a cross in on that ballot paper? This is what it will look like when you get into the voting booth on Thursday. Both sides have worked tirelessly to convince you which box to choose. So here's a brief reminder of the key moments in the campaign.
The 20th of February. David Cameron had returned from his negotiations in Brussels with a deal he said gave Britain special status in Europe, a deal he hoped would convince the British people.
I believe that Britain will be safer, stronger and better off in a reformed European Union.
But it wasn't enough to convince some of his closest allies, his friend and confidant Michael Gove, his old Oxford adversary, Boris Johnson.
I would like to see a new relationship based more on trade, on cooperation, but as I say, with much less of this supranational element.
On the 15th of April, the official campaign began. On the road for over 9 weeks and 5 days, the two sides would be touring the country, knocking doors, pleading for every vote. A third of the country was said to be still undecided. A week into the campaign came President Obama's intervention.
Maybe some point down the line there might be a UK-US trade agreement, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc, the European Union, to get a trade agreement done.
It brought a furious response.
I think the American president is coming out with the same rubbish that David Cameron is coming up with. Basically, the line is Britain isn't good enough.
The battle lines were already drawn. Brexit would be a step into the dark. Remain was running Project Fear. Claim, counterclaim, the divisions in Tory ranks were deepening. The debate centred on two conflicting visions of how Britain should be run and what Europe offers, on the economy and migration. Up and down the country, from town hall to factory floor, they even took the battle to the river.
You're a fraud, Nigel. Go back down the river, because you're up one without a canoe.
It's all right for millionaires, mate.
But then it stopped. The killing of Jo Cox brought 3 days of mourning and reflection.
The Britain that I love works with its
This
friends
week,
and neighbours.
a late flurry, a Wembley finale, the biggest debate of its kind, on a decision that will define what kind of Britain we want to be.
Independence Day.
Christian Fraser, BBC News.
And let's return to Simon McCoy at Westminster. Simon.
Jane, thank you. More than 46 million people eligible to vote tomorrow. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is here. This is truly a historic moment for this country.
Well, if you set aside love, marriage, children, this is probably the biggest decision you or I or anyone in this country will take, because it affects not just our lives, it'll affect our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives. It may reshape continental Europe. So this is a colossal decision, but it's also a very personal decision, it seems to me, because it affects the bread and butter of our daily lives. It will affect jobs. It will affect our public services. It will affect the sort of communities we live in. But it's also personal in this sense. It's about who we feel we are, our identity, what sort of country we want to be. And so although this has been, yes, it has been a difficult, abrasive, maybe unpleasant campaign at times, but perhaps that's only appropriate, that when the scale of stakes are so high, you want to make sure that nothing is unsaid, no argument is unheard, no stone unturned.
Norman, thank you very much. Norman Smith. And if you want to know what the two sides are saying on the different issues in this referendum campaign, you can explore the arguments in detail on the BBC News website. There's the address, bbc.co.uk/news. Back to you, Jen.
Thank you, Simon. Now, as promised, we'll find out what's happening with the weather. Thomas has more. I didn't like the look of Glastonbury, Thomas.
No, I think it's safe to say it's not going to dry out any soon. And to be honest, some of us, I think, were enjoying a bit of that mud action there on the footage we saw. But really, it's right across the south coast. At the moment, it's gloomy, it's cloudy. Look at all of this drizzle. There's a picture there from one of our weather watchers earlier on, and that cloud extends right across the Midlands as well. So quite a murky day. This is a very humid air across the UK at the moment as well, and we'll keep seeing more of that humid air coming in. So in the short term, actually, the weather's relatively quiet. We've got some spits and spots of rain, perhaps in the southwest of England, Wales, and also one or two showers across parts of Scotland. But the majority of the UK through the course of this afternoon is actually going to have a dry day with a bit of sunshine, and the temperatures, actually it feels even warmer than perhaps some of those temperatures suggest, because it is so muggy, so close out there. And here are the bits and pieces of rain that will be affecting the southwest of England, Wales, even some heavier bursts at time here. The southeast, for the time being, actually it's relatively quiet. It's later on that we start to see some of these storms develop. So probably from around about late afternoon, early evening, call it say 6 o'clock, the risk increases anywhere, say, roughly from the Isle of Wight to around about here, the Wash here. This area here could get some pretty big storms as well. There could be some torrential downpours, one after the other, could last quite a few hours, but particularly the extreme southeast of England. So we're talking about Kent and Sussex, an amber warning from the Met Office, and there could be a bit of disruption, unfortunately, from these storms. Very muggy first thing in the morning, but look at the rest of the country. It's certainly not the case everywhere. Many of us actually will be waking up to some sunshine first thing in the morning as these thunderstorms rumble away across the southeast and East Anglia. And actually the risk will continue for a time into the afternoon as well. Again, very muggy, 23 in that southeastern corner, but I think more sunshine across northern and western areas. So this disruption, potential at least for it, next 24, perhaps 48 hours across that southeastern part of the UK, whereas many of us actually won't be getting the storms. If anything, on Friday, perhaps a bigger risk of catching some showers more widely across the UK with a bit of sunshine around too. Maybe feeling just a fraction fresh. In fact, as we head into the weekend, there's just a suggestion that perhaps things will turn a little bit cooler, but there's still a risk of some sunshine and showers. So it's certainly looking very mixed over the next few days. And for sure, it's not going to dry out in Glastonbury.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Thank you. And just a reminder of our top story here this lunchtime. It is the last day of campaigning in the EU referendum, with both sides urging their supporters to turn out and vote. That is all from us this lunchtime. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news. Wherever you are, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.